He was cold, starving, and down to his last biscuit when he heard the cough. A woman, half mad, filthy, trembling, emerged from the woods and begged him for food. He gave it to her. That's when everything changed. She vanished into the trees, leaving behind a blood-marked map that shifted when touched, pulsed like it was alive, and led to a place no GPS had ever known. Now, Evan Travers is walking a path built from mercy, memory, and madness, where every act of kindness comes with a price, and some trails you never return from. It was one of those days when the sun refused to show its face. The sky was blanketed in dull gray, a haze of impending rain that smeared the horizon and made everything look tired. Evan Travers pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders, the fabric already damp from the morning drizzle. He was hungry, tired, and his boots were soaked through to the socks. The countryside had betrayed him. He'd thought this trek would be scenic, refreshing, a break from the chaos of his life back in the city. Instead, the winding trails and cold wind had taken more out of him than he'd expected. He reached into his pocket, fingers closing around a crumpled plastic wrapper. The last biscuit. Chocolate chip. Probably stale. But it was food. He peeled it open slowly, savoring the scent more than the taste he knew wouldn't live up to his expectations. Then he heard it, a sound too soft to be thunder, too human to be the wind. It was a cough. A dry, ragged sound that came from the trees lining the edge of the muddy path. Evan hesitated, biscuit halfway to his lips. He turned. For a moment there was nothing, just trees, the groaning of old branches in the wind, the whisper of dead leaves. Then he saw her. A woman. She was hunched over, shivering violently, hair matted with mud and leaves, skin pale and tight over her bones. Her clothes were torn, one sleeve completely missing, and her eyes, they looked like they had seen too much. She stumbled forward once, then dropped to her knees in the muck. Evan stood frozen. There was something unreal about her. She looked like a ghost dragged out of a nightmare. But the way her body shook, the way her hand reached forward, palm up trembling, it was all too human. "Please," she croaked. "Food." He looked down at the biscuit in his hand, his last one. The only bit of sugar and calories he had left before the next village, which was at least another 10 miles away. But he didn't hesitate for long. He knelt beside her, placed the biscuit gently into her hands, and helped her guide it to her mouth. She bit into it like a starving animal, chewing quickly, eyes fluttering closed. He tried not to watch. The desperation in her face made his stomach twist. "Thank you," she whispered, crumbs falling from her lips. "Thank you." "Are you hurt?" Evan asked. "Do you need help? I have, well, not much, but I can walk with you to the next town. There's a place—" She shook her head violently, eyes wide with sudden fear. "No town, no roads. They watch the roads." Evan blinked. "Who does?" She didn't answer. Instead, with shaking fingers, she reached into her coat. He thought for a moment she might be pulling out a knife. The movement was so erratic. But what she brought out was a folded, stained piece of parchment, old, wrinkled. She pressed it into his hands with strength that surprised him. "Take this," she said. "You helped me. No one helps anymore. You deserve to know." Evan unfolded it. It was a map, hand-drawn, rough. The lines were crooked, the ink faded in some parts and smeared in others. At the center of the map, marked in deep red, blood unmistakably, was a cross, a large one. Around it, strange symbols were scrawled, some of them so faded they were almost invisible. At the corners of the map were what looked like warnings, words in a language he didn't recognize. "What is this?" he asked, frowning. The woman was already backing away, her expression wild. "Don't follow it unless you're ready," she said. "Don't go unless you have nothing to lose." "Wait, who are you?" But she was gone. In seconds, she disappeared into the trees as silently as she'd arrived. Evan stood there, soaked and shivering, with a biscuit wrapper in one hand and a blood-marked map in the other. Something told him his life had just changed forever. He didn't sleep that night. The wind howled against his tent, and the image of the woman's haunted eyes wouldn't leave him. He turned the map over and over, staring at the blood-marked X, trying to make sense of the odd curves and angles that marked the trails. It didn't look like any topography he'd seen, but the contours felt real, lived in. Like someone had bled these paths into the paper with memories too heavy for words. He knew he shouldn't follow it. He should turn back, go to the nearest village, hand it to the police maybe. But when he woke the next morning, the decision was already made somewhere deep inside him. He packed up his tent, tucked the map into his coat, and veered off the main trail. The first few hours were uneventful. The woods were dense, but not impassable. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no bugs, just the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant snap of a twig. He kept checking the map, trying to align the landmarks. A crooked tree here, a forked rock formation there, and always that red X pulling him forward. By noon, he realized something was wrong. The map seemed to be changing. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the more he looked at it, the more certain he became. New symbols appeared where there had been none. Trails shifted slightly. He'd swear one of the trees on the parchment had grown a new branch. He didn't understand it. And yet, he couldn't stop. That night, he set up camp in a clearing marked on the map by a perfect circle. The trees here grew in a ring, their trunks bent slightly inward like they were whispering secrets to each other. He lit a small fire and stared at the map again. The red X pulsed in the firelight, the dried blood catching shadows in ways that felt intentional. He was starting to believe the map wasn't a map at all, not in the traditional sense. It was a guide, a test, and he'd already stepped too far into its path to turn back. The dreams started that night. They weren't dreams in the usual sense, not visions of flying or falling, not even the blurred echoes of memories. These dreams were vivid. They had weight, smell, cold. In the first, Evan stood in the clearing surrounded by those inward-bending trees, but they were no longer trees. They were figures, hooded, tall, each taller than the last. And they whispered. At first he couldn't make out the words, but the longer he stood there, the clearer it became. "You are close," they said. "Too close to go back, not close enough to understand." He jolted awake with sweat pouring down his back and his lungs gasping for air that wouldn't come fast enough. The fire had gone out. The forest was completely still, and the darkness outside his tent felt thicker than usual, like it had substance, weight, presence. He didn't sleep again that night. By morning the map had changed again. This time it wasn't just symbols or shifting paths. A new mark had appeared, a black spiral etched not with ink, but burned into the parchment. Evan could feel the heat still emanating from it, like the paper itself remembered the fire. And right beside it, a line of text had formed in blood-red scrawl, "Your kindness is your curse. You have been chosen." He stared at it, heart hammering in his chest. There was no mistaking it now. This map was alive. It responded to him, his actions, his choices. The woman, the biscuit. It had started then. He could still go back. He could try, but the idea filled him with dread. A deeper fear than what lay ahead. Whatever he had walked into, he knew instinctively it would not let him go so easily. By midday he reached a ravine that wasn't on any standard map, but was etched into the parchment as a black gash, flanked by two jagged arrows. The sides of the ravine were steep, but not unclimbable. There was a bridge made of wood and vine, ancient and barely clinging to the opposing cliffs. He stepped onto it carefully, every creak and groan beneath his boots sounding like a scream. Halfway across, he paused. Something was carved into the planks. Symbols. the same ones from the corners of the map. He knelt and brushed the moss away, revealing a crude engraving of a star-shaped symbol surrounded by concentric circles. In its center, an eye. He didn't know why, but he reached out and touched it. Instantly, pain shot through his arm, white-hot and searing, like he'd placed his hand on a stove. He cried out and stumbled back, grabbing his wrist. The skin there was burned, blistered, in the exact shape of the symbol. He looked down. The mark was burned into him, permanently. The map began to hum in his coat pocket. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Whatever had chosen him, whatever had started this journey, it had branded him, claimed him. There was no more going back now. That night the dreams grew worse. This time he was underground. A vast tunnel stretched before him, lit by torches that flickered without flames. Shadows danced on the walls, forming shapes, animals, people, monsters, morphing from one to the next. He walked forward, unable to stop his feet. At the end of the tunnel was a stone door covered in blood-red handprints. A voice spoke, deep, resonant. It shook the bones inside him. "Your hunger opened the gate. Your mercy keeps it open." He woke with a scream lodged in his throat, gasping, eyes wide. The fire was out again. But now there were footprints in the mud outside his tent. Bare, human, circling. Evan packed quickly and moved on. He didn't eat that day. Couldn't. The memory of that voice, the words burned through him worse than the mark on his wrist. The spiral on the map had grown larger. The red X, too. They were converging. Whatever waited at that spot was getting closer, and it was waking up. By evening, he reached a valley filled with broken statues. Each one had been carved from black stone, their faces twisted in agony. Mouths open wide, screaming silently into the void. One was missing its head, another its hands. He stepped carefully through the field of stone, but the silence was wrong. It wasn't absence of sound, it was the smothering of it. Even his footsteps made no echo. In the center of the valley stood a single statue, untouched by time. A woman. Her face was serene, her hands outstretched. In her palm rested a bowl made of the same black stone. The map pulsed in his pocket again. He approached the statue. Inside the bowl was a stone biscuit, identical to the one he'd given the woman. His heart dropped into his stomach. He reached out and touched it. In an instant, he was somewhere else. A memory, but not his own. A field. A man on his knees. A woman starving. He offered her his last biscuit. She wept. He smiled. Then came the shadows, tall, silent, watching. The woman changed. Her eyes turned black, her skin pale as ash. She reached into her coat and handed him something. The map. Evan gasped and stumbled back, blinking hard. The statue remained unmoved, but now the map in his hand showed the next path, a trail leading into the trees beyond the valley, where light never touched the earth. He knew now he wasn't the first. He was part of a cycle, a story that kept repeating, and this time it had chosen him. The forest beyond the valley was unlike any place Evan had ever been. It was thick, not with life, but with memory. The trees were older here, their bark split with deep scars and strange markings, some carved, some grown that way. The air was colder, and every step forward felt like a step deeper into someone else's nightmare. His own breath seemed muted, like even sound didn't want to disturb what lingered here. The map had changed again. The spiral that had once been a mark on the edge was now nearly touching the red X. The lines of the trail were glowing faintly, red, as if blood had soaked into the paper itself and was pulsing with a heartbeat. His own heart was matching its rhythm now. He could feel it in his hands, his feet, behind his eyes. He was being drawn forward by something ancient, by something waiting. He didn't know how long he walked. Time had started bending, stretching. The sun was gone. The sky above the canopy was a constant swirling gray, and the wind whispered words he didn't understand. His body was running on instinct, on determination alone. Hunger gnawed at him. He'd eaten nothing since giving the woman his biscuit. Water had become scarce. But even as his body weakened, something inside him strengthened. Resolve. The need to finish this, to reach the X. He came to a clearing as night fell, if it could even be called night in a place that had forgotten sunlight. In the center stood a cabin, old, slanted, as if it were sinking into the earth itself. The wood was rotted, blackened by time and elements, yet the structure held barely. One window had been shattered and boarded up from the inside. The door hung crooked on one hinge. There were no footprints, no signs of life. But Evan knew. This was the place marked by the X, the heart of the map. The cabin was waiting for him. He stepped forward slowly, boots sinking slightly into the moss-soft ground. The air smelled like damp earth and decay. The closer he got, the colder it became, like the temperature dropped with each breath. His fingers trembled as he reached for the door. It opened before he touched it. Inside, darkness waited, but not empty darkness. It was thick, coated with something unseen. The air buzzed with tension. He stepped in, and the door creaked shut behind him. The room was small. One chair, one table. A fireplace, long cold. And across from him, a woman sat in the chair. Her, the same woman, but not. Her hair was longer, darker. Her eyes were hollow. Her skin was no longer pale. It was cracked, as if made of porcelain and splintering under invisible pressure. She stared at him, unmoving. "You made it," she whispered, voice thin as smoke. "Most don't." Evan swallowed hard. "What is this place?" She looked around, then back at him. "It's where the map ends, and where it begins." He didn't understand. He stepped closer. She raised a hand, frail, trembling, and pointed to the table. On it, another map. Not the same one. This one was blank, no paths, no marks, just an old piece of parchment. "You're the cartographer now," she said. "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat, again that same motion he remembered from the woods, and pulled out a thin bone dagger. She held it toward him, handle first. "Mark your path," she said. He shook his head. "No, I don't—" She stood suddenly, and it was as though the whole cabin shuddered. The fire lit itself with blue flame. Shadows sprang to life in the corners, moving independently of any light source. The woman's face cracked further, revealing darkness beneath her skin. "You took the map," she said. "You gave without knowing. You followed without resisting. You came all the way to the heart. This was never about you, Evan Travers. It was about the role." "What role?" She placed the dagger in his hand. It was warm, too warm. "You are the next guide," she whispered. "This place feeds on mercy, on choice, on the roads not taken. You gave your last biscuit. That sealed your fate." He stared at the map, still blank. "You want me to draw?" "No," she said. "I want you to remember everything you've seen, everyone you've become. Draw not with your mind, but with what's been changed in you." The dagger's blade shimmered red now. Evan hesitated, then cut into his palm. Blood flowed, more than it should have. It hit the parchment, and the paper drank it up greedily. Lines began to appear, trails he'd walked, places he'd dreamed, symbols he didn't understand but had seen in visions. The spiral, the red X, the valley of statues, the bridge of screams. When he was done, the parchment was no longer blank. It was the same map he had followed. Exactly. He stared in disbelief. "But how? I didn't—" The woman nodded slowly. It was never drawn in ink. The map always needed blood. Evan felt weak. He dropped the dagger. The room spun, and the woman, she was changing, fading. Her voice, now echoing as if from far away, said, "You carry the burden now. Others will come. Hungry, lost, kind. They'll find you. You'll give, and the map will choose again." He collapsed. When he woke, the cabin was gone. He lay in a clearing, alone, the map folded in his hand. The same one. Red X still waiting. And behind him he heard footsteps. A cough. He turned. A man stood at the edge of the trees, dirty, exhausted, holding a stale biscuit. Evan looked down at the map. It was blank again, and in the wind he heard the woman's final words. "You carry the burden now." Evan stood motionless, the stale biscuit in the stranger's outstretched hand, the only thing anchoring him to reality. The man looked as Evan once had, tired, hungry, unsure whether the forest or his own thoughts were more dangerous. His eyes were wide with uncertainty, his body trembling from fatigue and cold. Evan felt it all, the mirrored ache, the echo of that same moment when he'd first encountered her, the starving woman, the map. He remembered the moment he'd chosen kindness over survival. Now he was the one being offered that final act of mercy. Evan slowly rose to his feet, his fingers tightening around the folded map. It no longer felt like paper, it felt like bone, old, heavy, and alive. His palm still bore the thin scar from where he had cut himself to redraw the lines. It hadn't healed. It never would. The man took a step closer. "Are you okay?" Evan stared at him for a long time. Then, gently, he reached out and closed the man's fingers around the biscuit. "Keep it," Evan said, "but you look like you need it more than I do." Evan smiled, a weary, knowing expression that didn't touch his eyes. "Trust me, you'll need it where you're going." The man blinked. "Going?" Evan opened the map. As if triggered by the moment of kindness, the map once again came to life. Trails bled into view. The spiral at its center pulsed slowly, deliberately, and the red X burned brighter than ever. But this time, something was different. New paths began to branch from the main trail, subtle lines that hadn't been there before. He watched them crawl outward, snaking into the unknown as though the forest was growing with his decisions. The man noticed the change in Evan's expression. "What is that?" Evan hesitated. He could lie. Tell him to turn back, to find a town, seek shelter, forget all of this. But he didn't. Instead, he handed him the map. The moment the man touched it, his face changed, eyes widening in a mixture of fear and awe. The symbols shimmered in the fading light, and Evan stepped back. "You'll understand soon," Evan said. "Follow it, if you dare." The man looked down at the blood-marked parchment. "Why me?" Evan turned his face toward the darkened tree line, the trees now bending slightly, as if bowing to him. "Because you offered," he said, "and because mercy always demands a price." He didn't wait to see what the man would do. He walked away, deeper into the forest, following a path that hadn't been on the map before, a path that responded only to him. His role had changed. No longer the seeker, now he was something more, the guide and the architect, and perhaps, eventually, the trap. Time stopped meaning anything. Days bled into one another like ink spilled into water. Evan found himself returning to the cabin more often now, not because he wanted to, but because it called him. It was the only fixed point on the map. No matter how the trails shifted, no matter how far he wandered, he always returned to it. But every time he returned, something about it had changed. One time, the walls were covered in carvings, names, dates, etchings of symbols he'd seen in his dreams. Another time, the cabin had no roof, and rain poured through it even though the sky above was clear. Once he walked through the door and found himself in a candlelit cathedral instead of a wooden room. The cabin wasn't just a place, it was the heart of the map, the mouth of the story, and it was alive. The visitors began appearing more frequently. They came in all shapes and states, young and old, hopeful and broken. Some were desperate, others curious. One was laughing when he arrived, another was crying before Evan even spoke. Each had offered something to someone before being drawn here. A meal, a place to sleep, a few coins, a gesture of humanity in a world gone cold. And each one carried the same question, why me? Evan never gave the same answer twice, because they were all right, and they were all wrong. The map chose differently for everyone. It twisted to their fears, their flaws, their hidden truths. It was not merely a guide. It was a mirror, a test, and a sentence. Some walked the trail and returned. Changed, yes, but whole. Others were never seen again. And some became like Evan. Extensions of the map itself, shadows of mercy and memory. One night Evan dreamed again. He was in the Valley of Statues, but this time the statues moved. They reached out to him, whispered. One touched his shoulder and said in a voice both male and female, "You can end it." "How?" Evan asked. The statue's mouth opened wide, and inside was not a throat or stone but a void. Endless and spiraling, filled with billions of other maps, other evens, other travelers walking through their own nightmares. "You must give the last biscuit to yourself." He woke screaming. It made no sense, but the words echoed in his mind, looping over and over. What did it mean to give something to yourself? How could a cycle be broken if you were the one keeping it alive? And then he remembered the first time he'd seen the woman, the way she'd looked at him, not with gratitude, but with deep sorrow. As if she'd known what would happen. As if she hadn't wanted the biscuit, but had needed someone else to give it, to carry the map. The burden, the curse. Evan stood in the center of the forest once more, the trees now bent fully in toward him, almost reverent. He pulled the last biscuit from his pack, not the stale wrapper, a new one that hadn't existed before but was now warm in his hand. A biscuit meant for him. He placed it on a stone, then sat beside it. Hours passed, then footsteps. Evan turned his head. It was him, a younger version, himself from before the map, before the forest, clean clothes, bright eyes, hopeful. "What is this?" the younger Evan asked. "You're hungry," the older Evan said softly. "Aren't you?" "I guess I am." The older Evan pushed the biscuit toward him. "Take it." The younger self hesitated. "Why?" "Because kindness, even to yourself, is how the curse ends." He took it, ate it, and everything shattered. When Evan awoke, he was back on the path. No map, no spiral, no scar. The air smelled like spring. Birds chirped. Sunlight filtered through the trees. He looked around. No cabin, no strange statues. Just an ordinary trail winding through the woods. In his hand was a single, unmarked biscuit wrapper. He smiled, then turned back toward the road. Somewhere in another forest, someone else would offer their last act of kindness. But for Evan Travers, the map was finally folded for good. And in the end, it wasn't blood that marked the path. It was mercy. But mercy, like anything rare and powerful, does not go unnoticed. Even as Evan walked away, free, unburdened, human again, something stirred in the soil beneath the trees. The forest didn't forget. It had not been destroyed, only denied its prize, and the map, though gone from Evan's hands, had not ceased to exist. Far away under a night sky bruised with deep purple clouds, a girl stood on the edge of a trail she didn't remember choosing. She was lost. Her shoes were torn, her hands scraped. Hunger gnawed at her belly like an animal with too many teeth. She reached into her coat pocket, searching for the mints her grandmother had given her the day she'd set off for the trip that went so wrong. Instead, her fingers brushed something unfamiliar. She pulled it out. A folded piece of parchment, soft with age. It pulsed faintly in the dark, warm like breath. The girl frowned. "What's this?" She unfolded it. The map stared back. No roads, no trails, only a red X. And somewhere in the woods the wind whispered, "Kindness is the door. The path is waiting." The girl hesitated only a moment. Then she stepped forward, and far away in a place no longer tethered to time, Evan Travers stood beneath a sky of blood-red stars, not lost, not trapped, but watching, waiting. The forest would always hunger. The map would always find someone new. But now someone else stood between it and the innocent, someone who had walked the full circle and broken it. He turned to the shadows behind him. Others were there now, shades of those who had chosen mercy, fragments of givers who had paid the price without understanding the cost. They were not ghosts. They were guardians, bound by their compassion, made eternal by their refusal to turn away. Evan nodded to them, and they nodded back. Because every map needed a maker, every curse needed a counterweight, and every hungry forest needed someone willing to walk into the dark with nothing but hope and an outstretched hand. The wind rose again. Somewhere, another biscuit changed hands. The cycle didn't end. But now, it had a choice. The days blurred into a ritual. Evan walked the woods endlessly, his footsteps carving grooves into the trails, the trees growing familiar with his presence, no longer looming predators, but silent sentinels. Sometimes he would come across remnants of those who came before him. A rusted compass buried in a hollow tree, a torn boot tangled in brambles. Once the faint outline of initials carved into a stone, J plus M, keep going. And always the map changed. It no longer waited for him to follow it. Now it responded to him. Trails would vanish as he stepped over them. New ones appeared in places he had only dreamed of. One morning he awoke to find the forest gone altogether. In its place, a desert of white sand and cracked mirrors that reflected not his image but his regrets. The sky pulsed blood orange, and when he looked down at the map, the red X had split into two. This time, the choice was clear. One path led to the spiral again, deeper, darker, colder than ever. The other led back toward the mountains, toward the places of light, toward silence. But the path of silence always ended in forgetting, and Evan knew he couldn't forget. The forest didn't just feed on kindness, it fed on memory. He chose the spiral. The first night he slept along that path, he dreamed of the woman again. But this time, she wasn't starving. She was laughing, dancing barefoot beneath a purple moon. Her hands weren't trembling. They were strong, stained with earth and power. "You're close," she said, spinning. "To what?" "To the truth." She stopped inches from his face. "But the truth isn't always freedom." "I don't want freedom," he said. "I want to understand." Her smile vanished. "Then prepare to drown." He woke up choking, not from a dream, but from water. His campsite had flooded, though no river was near and no rain had fallen. The forest had changed again. The ground itself now pulsed with tides. He scrambled to higher ground, coughing up mud, his pack soaked. The map floated toward him, pristine, untouched by the water. He stared at it. A new symbol had appeared near the X. A door. And beside it, the simplest instruction yet. Knock. He followed the trail through twisted roots and ash-black bark until he reached the place. A tree stood alone in a hollow, its trunk thick and gnarled like a clenched fist. On its face a single outline had been carved in old, almost forgotten strokes. A door. No handle, no hinges, just wood. Evan stepped forward and raised his hand. He knocked. The world split, not in sound, but in sensation. His ears rang with silence so loud it collapsed into thunder. His vision blurred into kaleidoscopic shapes. Stars, maps, blood, teeth, the woman's eyes, the biscuit, his own hand feeding himself, and the spiral swallowing it all. He fell, but not down. He fell inward, into the forest's memory. He stood in a version of the world that was not quite past, not quite dream. Trees bent in reverse, their branches forming words in forgotten tongues. Shadows moved backward. The stars in the sky blinked like eyes, and all around him were moments, echoes of those who had walked the path before. A man giving his coat to a stranger in the rain, a child sharing their only candy bar with a crying friend, A girl staying with an old woman who had collapsed on the road, each act of kindness, each one a door, and each one a price. Then came the voices. You are not alone. You are not the first. You are not the last. Evan turned. A figure emerged from the trees. It was him, but older, paler, eyes dim but not dead. The older Evan held the map, worn almost to dust, and spoke without opening his mouth. You've walked further than most. Who are you? Evan whispered. Who you will be if you keep walking. Is that a warning? It's a promise. They stared at each other. The wind stopped. The world held its breath. Then the older Evan held out the map. This time, he said, you mark the end. Evan took it. The parchment burned in his hands, shifting, writhing, growing into something vast and terrible. The X bled into the spiral. The door creaked open behind him. And ahead, a path appeared unlike any he had ever seen. It was made of bone and stars, of kindness and consequence, and it asked him only one question. Would you do it again? He stared at it for a long time and then stepped forward. When he emerged, he was somewhere new. Not a forest, not a desert, not a place bound by gravity or time, a shore. At the edge of a sea that whispered secrets in his own voice. The sand beneath his feet was soft, shimmering with flecks of gold. The sky above was split between light and dark, constantly shifting, and before him stood a monument, tall, ancient, covered in the same markings he'd seen on the map. He approached it. At its base, a single inscription. Here lies the one who knew what it meant to give. And beside it, a box. He knelt and opened it. Inside, one last biscuit, wrapped, unbroken. He stared at it for a long time, tears blurring his vision. Then, slowly, he stood, walked to the water's edge, and placed it gently upon the tide. The waves carried it away. The sky sighed, and behind him, the map disintegrated. Not in fire, not in wind, but in peace. The cycle didn't end, but Evan Travers did. Not in death, but in choice. In the kind of choice that too few ever make. He gave, even when he had nothing left. And in the heart of a forest that fed on kindness, he became the only thing it could never consume. A man who asked nothing in return. A man who walked the path and never once turned back. Somewhere in a town that had long forgotten its name, a boy sat on the edge of a crumbling sidewalk, hugging his knees to his chest. He was young, no more than 10, but his eyes held the same heavy sadness Evan once saw in his own reflection. His stomach growled. He had run from something, or maybe toward something. It no longer mattered. All he had left was a single cracked coin and a dream that wouldn't stop playing behind his eyes. A dream of a forest, of a door, of a man with tired eyes who said, "Even the smallest kindness leaves a trail." A woman passed him on the sidewalk. She looked down at him, hesitated, and kept walking, then stopped. She turned back. "Are you hungry?" she asked. The boy looked up slowly and nodded. The woman reached into her bag. A biscuit, still warm, wrapped in parchment. She handed it to him. And the world changed. The street blurred, the buildings trembled, a gust of wind blew leaves in impossible spirals down the alley. The boy blinked, and in that moment the coin in his hand turned cold. He opened his palm. It was no longer a coin, it was a map, old, familiar, and marked with blood. The woman had already vanished into the crowd. The boy stood slowly. The world around him pulsed softly. Nobody else seemed to notice. He unfolded the map. At the center, a red X, and in the corner, a name. E. Travers. Years passed. The boy, his name was Callan, never stopped following the trails. Some led nowhere, others to impossible places beneath the world. One time he found himself walking through a village of people made of ash and echo, all whispering his name before dissolving in the wind. Each path was a test. Each act of kindness deepened the map's hunger. But Callan was not like Evan. Where Evan had once hesitated, Callan asked no questions. He gave freely. He followed relentlessly. He never sought the end, only the next person to help. And eventually he too came to the cabin. By then the forest had changed. The trees were taller. The ground whispered different names. The statues in the valley had multiplied. But the cabin remained. Callan stepped inside. A fire burned without flame. A chair sat in the middle of the room, empty, until he blinked. Then a figure appeared in it, familiar, ancient, kind-eyed. Evan. Older now, or maybe younger. The lines on his face were the type that didn't come from age, but memory. "You made it," Evan said. Callan stepped closer. "I saw you in my dreams since I was a child." "I know." "Why me?" Evan tilted his head. "Because you accepted the biscuit, and because you didn't question the cost." Callan looked down at the map in his hand. It had grown with him, evolved. It now bore marks he'd never seen before. Spirals within spirals, roads beneath roads, symbols that spoke in emotions instead of words. "What happens now?" he asked. Evan leaned forward. "That depends. Are you ready to carry it?" Callan didn't answer with words. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a biscuit of his own, fresh, unbroken, wrapped in cloth he had stitched himself. He placed it on the table. "I've been ready a long time," he said. Evan smiled. "Then it's time." The map between them burned, not in destruction, but in rebirth. The parchment peeled itself open, unfolded and unfolded and unfolded until it covered the walls, the floor, the very air. Trails burst from its center like veins, glowing with soft golden light. Each one led to a story, a moment, a hand offering food, a voice saying, "I'll help." Kindness etched across time. Evan stood. "You are not me," he said, "and that's why this will work." Callan felt it too. The shift. The forest's hunger curling in on itself. Not fed, not denied, but understood. Evan placed a hand on Callan's shoulder. "Go." Callan stepped forward into the map, now three-dimensional, now alive. He walked along paths built from memory and blood and warmth. He passed people he'd helped, faces that once wept, now smiling, arms reaching out not for rescue, but in gratitude. And at the center, where once there had been a red X, there was now a fire, a real one, and around it others sat. Some old, some young, some shadows. All of them had once walked the path. All of them had once given their last biscuit. He sat beside them, and the forest, watching from the darkness, did not reach for him. Not this time. It bowed, because mercy, when given without expectation, cannot be devoured. It becomes a seed, and Callan, like Evan before him, had planted thousands. One by one, new trails lit up in the dark. Not red, not spirals, but gold. The forest was changing, and the map was growing. Years passed, though no one could measure them. Callan became a myth long before he stopped walking the trails. In distant villages, they whispered of a boy with a glowing map and fire in his eyes, who arrived just when the world seemed darkest. In storm-ravaged towns, people claimed to have seen him guiding survivors through impossible paths that hadn't existed before. He was there in moments when mercy was needed most, never speaking much, always offering just enough. A cup of water, a place to rest, a simple biscuit wrapped in cloth and warm from his pocket. He rarely spoke of where he came from. Fewer still ever saw the map. Those who did never forgot it. They said it breathed like it had lungs, and that if you listened closely, you could hear it whispering names, those who had walked before, those who had paid the price, those still to come. But the forest never left him. Sometimes He'd wake in the middle of a village square, standing alone beneath the stars, only to find the trees had crept back around him, thick and watching. Their roots broke through cobblestone and concrete alike, claiming territory not with violence but with inevitability, and still he walked. He had become something the map itself didn't expect. Not just a guide, but a gardener. Callan began planting things in his wake. Not trees, not flowers, moments. Moments of kindness, of healing, of light. He taught others to help, not because they would be rewarded, but because it was right. He left no sermons, only actions. He vanished before thanks could be given. And yet, the places he touched grew brighter. But even gardeners grow tired. He felt it one night while sitting beside a small fire in a clearing only he knew. His legs ached more than usual. His breath was shorter. The forest was still, but not watching. It was listening, waiting. He opened the map. The trails were vast now. They sprawled across entire continents, threading through cities, mountains, oceans. At the center, the red X had changed. It was now a circle, a door, and beneath it words that hadn't been there before. It's time. Callan stood slowly. The forest parted for him. The trail was unfamiliar. He liked that. For once, he didn't know what came next. As he walked, he passed memories carved into the trees, names, faces, tiny moments of the lives he'd touched. The woman with the broken foot, the soldier who cried in the rain, the boy who refused to steal and nearly starved until Callan handed him half a biscuit and smiled. Each step forward brought peace, not in knowing, but in having walked enough to no longer need to know. The trail ended at a lake. Still, black, perfect. Across its surface floated the last biscuit he had given, untouched by time or hunger. He stepped into the water. It did not chill him. Each step made ripples that formed words behind him. Mercy, memory, map. When he reached the center, the water folded upward, not like a wave, but like a door opening. He stepped through and vanished. Somewhere else, a child screamed in frustration. His mother had told him there was no food left until morning, but he'd seen the box in the cupboard. He'd seen it. He was tired of always going last, of giving up his snacks to his little brother, of being told that kindness matters more than cookies. He kicked his blanket off. That's when he saw it, sitting on the windowsill, a biscuit, wrapped in cloth, still warm. He frowned, climbed out of bed, opened the window. There was no one outside. But folded underneath the biscuit was a note. No name, no signature, just 4 words. Even the map forgets. He took the biscuit, sat on his bed, and stared into the dark. Somewhere, deep in the woods, no one could ever quite find on purpose, a fire lit itself. The forest stirred not in hunger, but in memory. Because the trail never truly ends. It only waits for the next hand to give, the next heart to open, the next soul to walk the path. And somewhere, maybe not today, maybe not for years, someone will find the map again. They'll give their last biscuit to someone who needs it more, and the forest will open, softly, without malice, with mercy. And the whisper will rise, "You gave, now walk." Long after Callan walked into the lake and vanished, the world continued turning. Cities grew, fell, and grew again. New wars were fought and forgotten. Technology soared. Maps were digitized, automated, made obsolete by satellites and smart devices. But some places refused to be mapped. Some forests remained untouched, cloaked in myth, protected by silence and old stories that no one could quite trace to their source. It was in one such forest that a girl named Lonnie found herself. She hadn't planned to come here. She'd only wanted to get away, from school, from the endless buzzing of her phone, from her mother's new boyfriend, and the way he smiled without warmth. She'd run, hopped a fence, followed a trail she didn't recognize, and wandered deeper than she should have. Hours passed. The sun slipped behind clouds that came from nowhere. And then the path stopped. Dead. Not blocked, not twisted, just ended. She turned around, but the trail was gone, swallowed. She didn't panic, not at first. She pulled out her phone, no signal. She tried to retrace her steps. No familiar trees, no markers, only silence, heavy and watching. She sat beneath a gnarled tree and pulled out the granola bar from her backpack, and paused. Someone else sat across from her. A boy, no, older than her, a teenager. His clothes were strange, worn, his hair matted like he'd been sleeping in the woods. He watched her without blinking. She stiffened. "Who are you?" He smiled. "You're hungry." She clutched the bar tighter. "I'm fine." He didn't argue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. A biscuit, still warm. The scent of it drifted across the space between them like a memory Lonnie didn't know she had. He held it out to her. She hesitated, then took it. The boy stood, nodded once, and disappeared into the trees. Lonnie looked down at the cloth. Beneath the biscuit was a folded square of paper. Her fingers shook as she opened it. A map. No roads, no rivers, just an X, drawn in something darker than ink. That night Lonnie dreamed. A cabin in the woods. A woman with hollow eyes. A man offering a biscuit to himself. A spiral. A sea. A trail of fire. She woke with the map clenched in her fist. The trail was back now. But it curved in a direction she didn't recognize. Her phone was still dead. She should have run the other way. She didn't. She followed. Each step brought more visions, more memories that weren't hers. Echoes of Evan, of Callan, of the countless others who had walked this strange road before her. She saw the statues in the valley, the bridge carved with names, the tree with the door carved into its bark. When she reached it, the door didn't wait for her to knock. It opened. And on the other side, waiting, ancient, smiling with sadness, stood Evan Travers. He didn't speak. He only held out his hand. Lonnie stepped through, and the map changed again. Decades passed. Names faded. The stories remained. And still the map moved, from one pocket to another, from biscuit to biscuit, from act of kindness to act of grace. It had been rewritten 1,000 times, in blood, in mercy, in memory. It now contained mountains that no longer existed, rivers that never had names, and trails formed entirely out of choices made by people who thought no one noticed. And every time someone gave their last biscuit, it glowed softly at the edges, not brighter, but deeper, as if it were saying, "Yes, this one too." Somewhere in a town being swallowed by fog, a man knocked on the door of a homeless shelter just before midnight. He carried a duffel bag and a limp in his left leg. The woman who answered the door had kind eyes and an exhausted smile. "I don't have any money," he said. She stepped aside. "We don't need it." He sat at the table. Another man offered him soup. A girl gave him a fresh pair of socks. No one asked questions. When the man opened his bag later that night, he found something he hadn't packed. A biscuit. And a map. He didn't ask how it got there. He only wept. Because some part of him remembered. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to whisper, "I've walked this before." The forest was still out there. It no longer lived in one place. Now it bloomed in moments. A hallway lit by a flickering bulb where a stranger offers you their only umbrella. A train seat given up by someone with aching feet. A hand reaching out without expectation, only instinct. Every time mercy won, the forest stirred. Every time someone gave, the trail lengthened. Every time a biscuit changed hands, the map opened. The story was no longer about Evan, or Callan, or Lonnie. It was about you. About what you'll do when you find yourself standing at a crossroads and someone beside you is starving, for food, for hope, for one single moment of grace. What will you give? What will you lose? What will you find? Somewhere, a map waits, folded in an old coat pocket, marked in blood and memory, ready, always ready, to begin again. The city of Brimvale had always been the kind of place where people passed each other without looking. Its streets were lined with faces wrapped in headphones, eyes glued to screens, hands too full of burdens to ever extend. It was a place where kindness had become a currency no one carried, which is why when Harper found the biscuit, it made no sense. She'd just gotten off the night shift. She worked at the 24-hour print shop on the edge of Old Town, the part of Brimvale where buildings leaned and whispered things only the rats could hear. Her feet ached. Her back hurt. She hadn't eaten since her lunch break, 12 hours ago. She was tired of everything. The broken machines, the rude customers, the way the world kept asking her to give more than she had. She turned down an alley to shortcut home. It was always quieter there. Fewer street lights, fewer chances of running into someone who'd ask her for something she couldn't afford to give. Halfway down the alley, she stopped. There, on the cold concrete between two dumpsters, lay a biscuit, perfectly wrapped in a square of blue cloth tied with a single piece of golden thread. She blinked, looked around. No one, no sound, just the biscuit. She approached, half expecting a rat to dart out and claim it, but the air was still, frozen in that quiet, impossible way, like the world itself had paused to see what she'd do. She picked it up, warm, and under it, a map, old parchment, frayed edges. At first she thought it was a joke, one of those scavenger hunt things or some viral marketing stunt. But as she opened it, a strange pressure filled the air around her, a weight, not heavy but serious, like the moment before a choice. At the center, a red X. Her name was written beside it, Harper. She dropped the map, staggered back. But the moment it left her hands, the world around her twisted. The alley changed, the buildings softened. The shadows grew longer, deeper, greener. And the ground beneath her became soil. Leaves rustled above. The alley was gone, and she was in a forest. And the map lay at her feet, untouched by dirt or dew. She picked it up again, heart racing, and saw new words scrawled beneath her name. Give first, then walk. Her breath caught. She turned, unsure of what she was even looking for, and saw her. A girl, no older than 15, barefoot, clothes torn, hair tangled, kneeling beside a tree, clutching her stomach. She looked up, eyes wide, empty, hungry. Harper looked down at the biscuit. She thought of her aching stomach, then stepped forward. Here, she said, voice cracking as she offered it. The girl took it like it was the only thing left in the world. And Harper felt the air shift again. The map burned in her hand, not in pain, in transformation. The forest grew darker, richer, with every step Harper took. She tried, at first, to go back, to return to the alley, the city, her job, and her apartment, with the flickering ceiling light and the unanswered bills. But the path behind her was gone, replaced with thick trees and vines that didn't look like they grew from any natural world. They pulsed faintly, with breath. The map showed her the way. Sometimes she held it out, and the trails glowed. Sometimes it whispered, and sometimes it simply warmed in her pocket as if to say, yes, this is right. It never showed her what came next, only where she was and what had already been. On the third day, she met an old man sitting on a stone bench carved from bone. He didn't speak, just held out a mirror. She looked, and saw herself at 5 years old offering her sandwich to a stray dog. Then herself at 16 giving her coat to a freezing woman outside the station. Then 20 staying late to help a co-worker who'd just lost her father. Then herself, now, standing in a forest of memory, a giver, always. She looked at the man. What is this place? He smiled with his eyes. Home. Elsewhere, beyond the forest's reach, the city churned on. People passed each other, rarely looked up. But sometimes they felt something. A warmth in their pocket, a softness on their shoulder, a biscuit on a bench. And the next person to take it would find the forest. It grew now, not just through trees and dreams, but through moments. Kindness was no longer a currency. It was a door, and every time it was opened, the forest grew. It no longer needed to pull people in. They were coming willingly, following a trail they didn't know existed until they had already chosen it. Harper found the cabin eventually. It wasn't what she expected. It was ruined, collapsed. Vines twisted through its walls, moss blanketed the floor. Only the fireplace remained whole, and in its hearth a single ember glowed, waiting. She knelt before it. The map unfolded on its own, and words formed, "Right." She looked around. "No ink," she whispered. "No pen." Then she understood. She took a deep breath and placed her hand over the glowing ember. It didn't burn. It opened. Inside her palm, a mark formed, a spiral. She pressed it to the map. The parchment drank her pain, her hunger, her hope. Lines formed, new trails, new X's, not in blood, but in trust. And the ember sparked to life. The forest lit up. Statues whispered. The door tree groaned. And far away, in a place that could have been Brimvale or nowhere at all, a stranger opened their hand to offer a warm biscuit to someone in tears. The map unfolded again. Its story continued. And in the forest, a new voice whispered, "Kindness is not lost. It was only waiting." Harper remained by the hearth as night fell, or what passed for night in the forest, where time didn't move forward but instead deepened. The stars overhead were unfamiliar constellations, shaped like broken compasses and hands reaching across voids. The fire in the ruined cabin crackled now, alive once more, but it didn't emit heat. Instead, it radiated memory, gentle waves of images, sensations, moments she had long forgotten. Her father carrying her on his back. Her mother singing lullabies before the world soured. The first time she shared her lunch with a classmate who'd had none. These memories didn't hurt, they anchored her. And the map pulsed in her lap, not as a burden now, but as a companion. In the morning she rose. A new trail had formed just beyond the cabin, twisting, silver-threaded, wrapped in the sounds of birds that no longer existed anywhere else. She followed it, not because she had to, because she wanted to. The trail led her through a field of mirrors. Each one showed a different version of herself. In one, she was bitter, hardened, refusing to share, turning inward to survive. In another, she never left Brimvale, withering under the weight of others' needs. In another, she was gone entirely, just a shadow on the edge of someone else's kindness. The mirrors weren't cruel. They were truthful. They showed her what kindness cost and what it prevented. She passed them all. At the end of the field, a man sat beneath a tree of woven glass. He was crying, his face hidden in his hands. She knelt beside him and didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't need to. Instead, she handed him a biscuit from her satchel. She had 3 now. The map provided them, 1 for each day she gave without being asked. The man looked at it, eyes wide, trembling. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "None of us do," Harper said. "That's why it works." He took it, ate, cried harder, and behind him a trail appeared. She nodded at it. He followed. The map glowed again. Years passed, if they could be measured. Harper became part of the forest, not as a prisoner, as a guardian. She marked paths not with signs, but with stories etched into stone and memory. She left tokens, notes under rocks, ribbons tied to branches, small gifts wrapped in cloth. She watched as more found their way here. Some arrived lost, some arrived furious, some arrived broken, but all of them gave, and all of them changed. There was the man who had never said, "I love you," and found himself unable to speak until he gave his shoes to a boy with frostbitten toes. There was the woman who lied for a living and found her truth only when she gave her last coat to someone shivering. There was the child who hadn't known kindness until she offered half a cracker to a dying bird and found herself in the garden of fireflies, where the map floated like a lantern. And in all their hands eventually appeared the biscuit, and beneath it the map. In time, stories of the forest reached the outside world, not as facts, as myths. They called it the Kind Wood, the Nevergrove, the Trail of the Last Biscuit. Some scoffed, others searched for it, hoping to find treasure or enlightenment or escape. They never did, because the forest wasn't a place you could chase. It was a place that came to you when you gave something without asking why, when you helped without expecting return, when you, at your lowest, still chose someone else. That's when the door opened. That's when the map found you. Harper grew old. Her hair grayed, her limbs slowed, her eyes sharpened. One day she woke to find the cabin rebuilt. Whole, welcoming. Inside a fire roared, and Evan Travers sat in the chair. He looked just as he had in the dreams. He smiled as she entered. "Took you long enough," he said. She laughed. "I got distracted." "That's the point." He stood, offered her the chair. She sat. The fire whispered. Evan handed her a box. Inside, a blank map, and one last biscuit. "You know what to do," he said. She did. She pressed her marked hand to the map. Lines formed, so many more than before. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, crisscrossing the world. She added one more. A path that led not into the forest, but out. Not back to Brimvale, but to a place no one had named yet, where kindness was not rare, because it had been planted, watered, protected, lived. She stood, biscuit in hand, opened the cabin door, and walked out. Into the next part of the story. The forest watched her go, then turned inward again, waiting, always waiting for the next person, the next hunger, the next act, the next gift, the next step. And in the silence between footsteps it whispered, "This is how maps are made." The world outside the forest had changed. Small things at first. A teacher gave her lunch to a student who always forgot theirs. A man missed his bus to walk an elderly woman across a flooded intersection. A child stood up for another on the playground, not because they were friends, but because silence would have been easier. In each case, when the act was pure, offered without pride or promise, a warmth followed, a sensation, a whisper, and sometimes a folded piece of cloth tucked in their coat, a biscuit, a map, a beginning. Harper's trail had become legend, though no one could say her name anymore, and the details had morphed into metaphor. The core remained. She gave when she could have taken, they said. She walked the trail no one returns from, and taught it to lead back, because that's what she had done. She'd taught the forest how to remember. It no longer consumed the kind. It learned from them. The spiral that once marked the forest's hunger had unraveled, thread by thread, into a ring. The red X had bloomed into a tree, and the map, alive, sentient, ancient, had begun to heal. Not because the world deserved it, because someone gave anyway. In a town that couldn't be found on any GPS, a boy named Milo sat by a window, watching the rain blur the edges of the day. His family had fractured years ago, split by silence, regret, things no one apologized for. He was the kind of boy who never asked for anything, because he'd learned that needing was dangerous. On the night of his 12th birthday, no one remembered. He didn't cry. He just lit a candle by himself, whispered a wish he didn't believe in, and stared out at the street where puddles reflected the gray sky. A knock at the door startled him. No one was there, just a package wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, a biscuit and a map. The map had no name on it. Not yet. But as Milo unfolded it, lines appeared. A trail, a destination, a promise. He looked up, and the alley behind his house now opened into trees he'd never seen before. He hesitated. Then stepped through. Milo met the ghosts of the forest first, not with chains or wails or horror. They were kind, tired. They asked him questions like, "What's something you gave and never got back? What's something you needed and never asked for? What's something you regret being silent about?" Each answer shaped the path ahead. One ghost handed him a spool of red thread. "Tie this to anything that breaks you," she said. "It won't fix it, but it'll remind you." Another gave him a mirror that only worked when he was honest. And the third? He gave Milo nothing but a name, his own. "Evan," he said. Milo blinked. "The Evan?" The man smiled. "No such thing. I'm an Evan. So are you, in a way." They walked together for a while, and Evan told him stories of the woman in the rain, of the valley of statues, of the tree door, and the man who burned the map to draw a better one. Milo listened, asked questions, then walked on alone. He came to a river of silence. There was no bridge, only a single plank of wood floating beside the bank. On it, instructions. Lay it down, then trust it. Milo did. As he crossed, voices bubbled beneath the surface. "Why should you give when no one gave to you? What if they take advantage of your heart? Kindness is weakness. You'll regret it." He nearly fell, but then he remembered the thread. He tied it to his wrist. The voices faded. He stepped off the plank. The forest opened, and the map changed. Milo grew. He stayed longer than most. He found the trail Harper had left, winding, strong, sacred. He walked it backward, not to return, to leave signs, to make it easier for the next person. He left biscuits in hollows, fire-starting kits by the roots of old trees, notes pinned under stones. "You are not lost. You are choosing." He carved stories into bark, not with knives, but with threads soaked in memory. When he grew tired, he built a house. Not a cabin, a home, with rooms for everyone who needed to rest, with a table long enough for 100 biscuits, with walls that sang when it rained. He called it the hearth, and it never locked its doors. Every traveler knew of it. Some found it when they were dying, some when they were giving up, some when they were just tired of being alone. They always left changed, not because Milo saved them, but because he reminded them who they were. One day the map stopped changing. Milo unfolded it and found it completely blank. No lines, no symbols, just a single note. "Well done," he laughed, then cried, then packed his things, left one last biscuit on the windowsill of the hearth, and walked the spiral trail one final time. The trees bowed, the ground glowed, and when he reached the place where the X had once been, he sat. He looked up, and saw the sky split, not in destruction, in invitation. He stood, and became the trail itself. Now there is no one forest. The map lives in a million pieces. Sometimes it's a whisper before you open a stranger's door. Sometimes it's a warm feeling after sharing your lunch. Sometimes it's a dream of someone with kind eyes and a cloth-wrapped gift. But always, always it leads you somewhere worth walking. And all it asks is this: when you have one biscuit left, what will you do? Because that moment, that's where the map begins. There came a time when the trail no longer led through woods, valleys, or mountains. It began to wind through hospitals, courtrooms, shelters, factories, everywhere humanity had allowed its kindness to become thin. The forest, once tethered to soil and shadow, now followed people in their everyday lives, waiting, listening, watching. A single moment could open the door. An exhausted nurse slipping her sandwich to a patient who had nothing. A teenager returning a stolen item with a note of apology. A man choosing to forgive someone who didn't ask for it. The forest flickered around them, just at the edge of perception, never demanding, never forcing, but always ready. The map still found them. It appeared in textbooks between pages, in coat pockets long unworn, folded into rain-splattered benches, sometimes a dream, sometimes a whisper. always arriving after a choice, never before. And when it appeared, it asked nothing more than acknowledgement. To open it was to remember something inside yourself the world had tried to bury. It found a woman named Rue one bitter winter morning. She'd lost her brother 6 years earlier to a war that had no exit. She carried the loss with her everywhere. It dulled her, made her slow to speak, quick to shield herself from joy. She worked in a bakery, quiet, clean, predictable. That morning a man came in, mud on his boots, eyes too wide, not local. She saw him eye the display of warm pastries. His hands were in his coat pockets, fingers twitching. He hadn't eaten, not in days. Rue stepped forward before he could speak. "Pick something," she said gently. "I can't pay," he murmured, ashamed. "You don't have to." He left with a warm biscuit in both hands, mumbling thank you like it physically hurt. Rue turned to return to her duties, and paused. Behind the counter, tucked neatly between 2 flour sacks, was a folded cloth. Inside, a biscuit, and beneath it, a map. Rue followed it to a place she hadn't known existed on the outskirts of her town. An orchard that hadn't bloomed in a decade now stood vibrant, humming with color that didn't belong to this season. Every tree was bent just enough to form a path. In the center of the orchard, a well. She approached. Carved into the stone rim was a question. What would you give if you knew it would never be returned? She didn't answer aloud. Instead, she dropped her locket inside. It held the only picture she had of her brother. The well glowed. The orchard shimmered. And Rue felt something not leave her, but lift. A grief no longer strangled. A memory no longer burned. Just peace. When she looked down again, the map had changed. A new trail. Her name written beside it, a new story unfolding. She walked it, not to forget, but to remember differently. By the 1,000th telling, the map had become more than parchment. It was folklore. It was a network of memory, a quiet force braided through lives, stitched between choices, carried like pollen by those who gave without knowing why. Some began to leave biscuits intentionally, on park benches, school desks, the porches of the lonely. They didn't all become portals, but some did. And that was enough. Somewhere in a city rising too quickly to notice itself, a little girl named Soraya walked through a train station after school. Her backpack was heavier than it should have been. She always carried extra granola bars, water bottles, socks. Her mother had taught her that some people didn't have the things we take for granted, and if she had more than one of something, she could always give. That day, she saw a man curled up by the wall near the vending machines, shaking, thin. Without hesitation, she knelt, took off her gloves, and placed a bar of chocolate into his hands. He stared at it like it was a diamond. He whispered, "Thank you." She smiled. "It's okay." She turned to leave, and heard something fall behind her. A biscuit, wrapped in old blue cloth. She picked it up slowly, unfolded the map. This time it wasn't inked in blood, it was drawn in gold. And the trail didn't lead into a dark forest. It led through the lives of people she hadn't met yet. And as she followed it, with her backpack full of too much kindness for just one person, she whispered to the map, "I'm ready." And the world opened. The map never ends. It shifts. It grows. Every time someone gives without waiting. Every time someone chooses grace. Every time someone makes room at the table, slows down to listen, or speaks up when silence is safer. Each of those acts becomes a path. Each path becomes a story, and each story becomes a place on the map. You may not see it yet, but you felt it. The warmth in your hand after giving. The pull in your chest when someone thanks you like they mean it. The strange dream of walking through trees you've never seen towards something you don't understand with a biscuit in your pocket. That's the forest. That's the map. That's the legacy of Evan, Callan, Harper, Milo, Rue, Soraya. and all those who never got names in the stories. Because the truth is simple. You are not the first. You will not be the last. But you are here now, and somewhere not far from where you sit, someone is waiting, hungry, cold, afraid. Will you give? Will you take the first step? The map is already unfolding. You just haven't seen it yet.